Shout out to Flip, our good brother here with us in spirit.
Was Flip scheduled to not be there today?
No, we just had too many mics that day, so I asked him to stay home.
Wait, so how does the elimination process goes when you feel like there's too many mics?
No, see, you guys using the wrong terminology. When you say elimination, it makes it like, no, we just had a day scheduled where we didn't need everyone to come in, so we had him stay home. He had Halloween off.
Queenzflip gets demoted. That's right. On the last episode of the Joe Budden podcast, you might have noted that Joe Budden shouted out Queenzflip, saying something like, shout out to Flip, our brother. You know who else was shouted out in that very same way and never came back? Melissa Ford. But I don't think Queenzflip is gone. I just think he is being phased out and told to stay home on the Friday recordings. Now, Ian was on Spaces with me Saturday night, and I played it at the beginning of this video. He said he told Flip to stay home because there's a lot of mics. Now, I thought, wait a second, hasn't the Joe Budden podcast always had a lot of mics, and now you're deciding to send Flip home? Something seems off. But we have to rewind a couple weeks ago, because the Mark Lamont Hill Queenzflip argument is tied to this very same issue. A couple weeks ago, Queenzflip was told to miss the main pod.
Ian told me to come into Patreon. I called Joe, like, why am I coming to Patreon for? And Joe said, just come into Patreon, I'm going to pay you fully. I end up coming into Patreon late, like an hour and a half late. So me and Joe behind, while I came in, was going back and forth. If you look at the camera when he was sitting over there, you would see that he was looking. I was standing there the whole time. So, I sat down just being angry.
And this time he was told, hey, you can come in for the Patreon and everything's going to be okay. You're also going to be paid for the main pod as well, even though you didn't show up. Now, I found that odd, because how are you going to get paid for podcasts that you don't show up to? But he still arrived about an hour and a half late, and Flip was angry because they were trying to stop him from appearing on the Patreon episode. So he was making a fuss off camera, and they would eventually capitulate. But see, the funny thing about capitulation is that it eventually ends, and I believe that what Joe Budden, Ian, and the upper brass at the Joe Budden podcast are doing is setting up a boundary that they have been trying to set for the last few years Flip has been on the show, but those boundaries are now being enacted, and I think Flip is in for the last days of his time on the Joe Budden podcast, and maybe he can stay longer, but that is if and only if he plays ball. So there's a lot of things that could lead to why Flip is being asked to come to the pod less. And I think the biggest being is that there's friction between him and Mona. Yeah, remember when Mona first joined the podcast? Flip was on her and they led to some type of big blow up.
Mona.
It's a myth about everybody.
We got Patreon. Look, we got notes. We got Patreon.
Don't be rude, bro.
Let's save it for Patreon.
Yeah. Anyway,
talk about that on Patreon.
Flip, can you stop interrupting?
Yeah, you so jealous.
You hit your subject right there.
No. But that wasn't the only blow up the two would have, as it seems like Mona and Flip would also have an off-air argument where Mona may have brought somebody up to press Flip.
First episode, we're going to see how red that face gets.
I'll make it. No. Cry.
I'm so nice to
I'm quick, because Mark ain't going to always be there. Let's move on.
Mark held it down. Mark was trying to walk away.
A lot of rat.
Now, that dust up behind the scenes wasn't something that they were aware of until Flip told them. But I think the podcast or the people who run the podcast were probably like, damn, this is another person that Flip is having issues with. And not only is it another person that Flip is having issues with, it's Mona, who right now is giving Joe Budden everything he wants. He loves Mona.
You've been killing.
Honestly,
me and my baby are big fans of yours.
Oh, I love
They say I'm showing too much excitement that you work here.
I like
So I'm
her.
working on it. But I'd be excited. I ain't gonna lie.
No,
I'd be waiting years for some of these.
I think he sees in Mona all of what Flip brings to the table, but a better communicator and someone that can spark conversation and even carry the show in a way that isn't as disruptive as Flip. Flip has the entertainment value. He's able to give the show a lot of energy, but it's in a way that centers himself. It doesn't allow other people to be comfortable. And now that Flip is falling off, he's digressing, people are gonna take Mona's side. That's right, Flip is the person who cried wolf. He's gotten into arguments with Ish, Ice, Mark Lamont Hill.
Because when you say that second, that I take that as disrespectful.
There's a lot of you said it
We take disrespectful, but for the
And it's not since you said I take disrespectful. No, Imani, I'm not potting.
Joe Budden.
I can say what I feel about whatever the I want to say. Who you talking to?
I'm talking to you.
I just.
But you disrespected me. But you did.
I just say what I feel about anything I feel like saying. What the I feel about.
Ian Schwartzman.
You decided it, and you come up there and try to condescend and play with me in front of people again.
So he really has no leg to stand on. Now, what was interesting to me was to focus in on Flip's actions. Because when Flip is being told what to do and maybe something that he doesn't want to do, he moves a particular way. And one of the ways he moves is he spends more time on Spaces. And that's exactly what happened that Friday where they record. He was on Spaces that whole day. It's almost like, if I'm not on the pod, I'm gonna go Space. And I always found that odd because Spaces is essentially no money in it. You could space for like a whole day and you're probably gonna get paid like $50 because the way monetization is on Twitter, what you get paid for the most is tweets, videos, and images, and Spaces don't really bring that much money. Yet, he's still on Spaces the whole day trying to build up his network. I think what Spaces does for Flip is it allows him to platform some of the people from Flip the Network, people like Breadman, Milfy, Sexy Stays, Big Phil. It allows him to kind of develop them in his ecosystem, and his audience gets used to them in a very cheap way that doesn't require studio time. And he also drops more on his channel when he's doing, these breaks from the Joe Budden podcast or these breaks where he has to leave because they told him to. So monitor that channel because I think time is coming. Also, another interesting thing I was wondering about is what happened to Queenzflip's studio? Remember the studio that Flip would record a lot out of? He would record the show with Shammy, Talk to the King, that he had an issue with and eventually canceled. Then he would also have the show with Holly, where he would have a studio with her, like a session where people would call. Those shows were pretty good, but he just stopped recording there. And it happened around the same time that the end of Improv occurred. So there's a lot going on with Flip, and I think it's all tied to his journey on the Joe Budden podcast. Now, the toughest thing about when you start to leave or when you're told to stay home is that a record is being kept both visually and internally of how things go when you are not there. And if you notice, the Saturday pod ran pretty smoothly. Everybody seemed like they was okay. People were allowed to talk. And I think what you will find is that Flip is the most disruptive to conversation. Well, maybe not the most disruptive. The actual most disruptive person is Joe Budden, because you could be making a point and he'll step in with some type of weird joke or chuckle and make you feel uncomfortable, right? Joe Budden's legacy in media is making his co-host feel uncomfortable. So it's not just Flip, but it seemed like the rest of the cast was just happier. They got to let their shoulders down. They got to be in their rhythm a little bit more. And Flip, the way he engineers content is to disrupt rhythm, to make people feel uncomfortable. And with Joe Budden there, who does kind of the same thing, it can create a conundrum where nobody feels comfortable, everyone feels uneasy, and it was okay for the first few years. That is exactly what Flip should have been doing because that's his style. But when Flip started doing that, arriving late to the show and cursing out members of the cast, it became too much. So much so that they told him to stay home. And it now looks to me like it's Flip on Wednesday and Mona on Saturdays.
But then there's another interesting element that Joe Budden introduced, and that is the idea of a third pod.
I ain't got the 20 to just drop up there like
the way my
Oh, you can come be a part of. Oh, we got this Thursday pod coming.
the way my brain works.
Right? He says that there's a Thursday pod coming, and that means that there's going to be now 3 days they film. They film on Tuesdays, and then I guess now they would film on Thursdays and Fridays. So maybe Flip's visibility and even Imani's is being shrunken because another pod day is coming. But time will tell.
But let me know what you think. Why is Flip being told to stay home more often? How will he respond now that he is being marginalized? I think if Flip was grown about it, he would take this with a sign that, hey, I only have to go to the pod once a week. I can still be on the Joe Budden podcast. I can still do my thing. I can use the Joe Budden podcast to promote myself. I really feel like it's an easy fix. Just show up, don't be late, and find out ways to make the co-host feel comfortable in his presence. Because I think what it is The co-hosts don't feel okay when he's around. I think they like him. I don't think they think he's a bad guy, but it's like that coworker you rock with, you think he's dope, you think she's dope, but then when you work in tandem with them, you realize you're not as efficient. You realize they always causing issues, and you would prefer if you didn't know them in a workplace setting and actually just knew them in a non-workplace setting. There's some friends that we have that if we were to work with them, we would think they suck as people. And I think that's what's happening with Flip and the rest of the cast. But like I said, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear what you have to say. Did you enjoy the pod without Flip? Did you feel like everybody was allowed to speak? We have to call it fair game, though, because it did feel like the pod lost a lot of energy towards the end. Like, it was a little bit rudderless. It was a good first, like, 2/3 of the pod, but then they started to wane. And even Mona, when she was talking about that Adidas topic of Pharrell, I was like, you don't care about this that much. You're just pretending to care. Why do y'all care about Pharrell and Adidas? It felt forced. It felt a little bit too extra. And it just felt like the cast was trying to engineer some type of topic for us to care about. But it wasn't necessarily earned. And I know some folks are going to be like, oh, Danny, it's just a podcast. No, sometimes you got to analyze the podcast. And I am interested to see how they move without Flip, because Flip is a lot of energy. So even when you don't have much to talk about, he can shift things up. He can take the rhythm and make it louder. He can make the voices get louder because he gets louder and everybody rises to what he does. All right, y'all, that's my video for now. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. And also tap in with my Patreon. There's a lot of content going up there, and there's a podcast going. I also think I'm going to be doing YouTube lives in the future. So make sure you tap in, turn on all of your notifications so that way you don't miss a thing. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace.